Hi teachers, thanks for having a look at this presentation for junior primary and for Science Week. I've just got a few things to go through before you start the presentation for students. First of all, the animation that I've chosen is a great one. It's really clear. It shows the journey of the Apollo 11 spacecraft to the moon and back, but it was created for the 40th anniversary of the landing, so you might want to just commence it at about 20 seconds, or you can reinforce to the students that it's actually the 50th anniversary. Secondly, the presentation includes some learning science strategies, and this is what I'm studying as a part of my Research Masters of Education. So they are spaced learning, and that's going to be incorporated by some pre-testing and some quizzing, and retrieval practice. And retrieval is just low stakes testing. So once again, it's things like quizzes, and I've included one of those. If you want to pause throughout the video, please do that to allow students time to have a think or to have a little chat. And I do provide some teacher training, complementary teacher training on learning science strategies. So I would love you to get in touch with me if this is something that your school is interested in. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't allow you to include an active link in the middle of a video anymore. So just before you start the presentation with students, if you'd like to put this link into a different window, you can just switch over to the window when the presentation indicates that it's time for the animation. Lastly, I do have a bit of a funny throat, so please forgive me if I have to take a sip of water or do a bit of a cough. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Hi there everyone. This is a presentation all about the Apollo 11 journey to the moon. And journeys and missions to outer space is the theme of Science Week. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what's the furthest that you have travelled from your home? Perhaps you've been on a holiday that's a long distance away, or you might have changed houses or moved homes. Have you come from somewhere which is a long way away? Just have a think, what's the furthest you've travelled from your home? And I'm wondering, is it this far? I don't think so, but you know what? You're so young that maybe in the future you will get to go on a spaceship. That would be super exciting. Well, in 1969, 3 astronauts left our home, and I mean our big home, planet Earth. That was 50 years ago. They were the first astronauts to land on the moon. So 2019 is the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and there you can see a picture of one of the astronauts on the moon. Isn't it amazing that you can look out at the moon at night and think there have actually been men who have walked on the moon? So amazing. Okay, so what I want you to think about first of all is, how far away is the moon from our planet Earth? Now, the reason I want you to think about this is because whenever we have a question that we don't know the answer to, but when we think about it, it activates a whole lot of pathways in our brain, and it gives us a whole lot of ideas about potential or possible answers. And then what happens when we find out the answer to that question? It really helps us to have thought about it first, because it really reinforces the pathway back to that memory. So we're going to do a lot of this brain activation before we watch the animation of the mission to the moon, and hopefully it will help you to remember this information. So first of all, let's have a think about our question of how far it is from the moon to the Earth. So an adult takes about a metre when they walk one step. So if you put 1,000 steps together, that would equal 1 kilometre in distance. I don't know if you go to the town swimming pool, but the biggest pool is usually 50 metres. And if you put 20 of those 50-metre pools together, that distance would equal 1 kilometre. So that will give you a little bit of an idea of how far 1 kilometre is. I want you to think, how many kilometres do you think that the moon is away from Earth? So it's going to be a big number. Just have a little think about it and then take a guess. Okay, let's find out what the answer actually is. The distance between the Earth and the moon is actually 384,400 kilometres. That is a really long distance. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up. At the end of this presentation, we're going to have a quiz. So I want you to see if you can remember some of these important pieces of information. So this one is the distance between Earth and the moon is 384,400 kilometres. You might even want to say that all together. It's a pretty big mouthful. Some more brain activation. Okay, so let's think about how fast the rocket was travelling when it was leaving our atmosphere. So outside your school is a school zone, and that's where cars can travel at 40 kilometres per hour, but no more. So what we want to think about is how fast did their rocket travel during takeoff? So if the cars outside the school are going very slowly at 40 kilometres per hour, how many kilometres an hour would a rocket be travelling when it travels through and leaves our atmosphere? So it's going to be a lot more than that. So just have a little bit of a think, and then you're going to take a guess. Okay, how fast did their rocket travel during takeoff? About 10,000 kilometres per hour. So that is really fast. But actually, that's not too difficult to remember. That's a pretty easy number to remember. Okay, the next one. I'd like you to think, how long does it take you to get to school? Maybe you walk from home, or you catch a bus, or maybe you ride your bike. Just think to yourself, how long does it take you to get to school? Now, I want you to think, how long do you think it took for the Apollo 11 to arrive at the moon? Now, it's a much longer distance, but we know that they're traveling much, much faster. So it's a bit tricky. So have a think and then take a guess. How long do you think that it took Apollo 11 to arrive at the moon? Okay, here's the answer. 4 days. That's actually quicker than I thought. How about you? 4 days. So remember that Apollo 11 took 4 days to arrive at the moon. Now, Neil Armstrong was one of the astronauts in the first fleet that went to the moon. And he said something that became famous. I guess if you were stepping out of the lunar module and you were the first person to land on the moon, you'd want to say something significant because there are a lot of people watching as you did it. So what would you have said? Have a think. What would be something important that you could say as you left the lunar module and took your first step onto the moon? Okay, so let's see, what did Neil Armstrong actually say? This is a very famous quote, and it's something that you'll probably hear again many times in the future. He said, "It's one small step for mankind, one giant leap for mankind." So he was talking about the fact that it was just a little step down the ladder, but it was an amazing achievement that had been created by a lot of people. And he said basically mankind, or all the people of the earth, past and present, had contributed to people being able to land on the moon. So this is the last question. The astronauts collected samples when they were on the moon, and I'd like you to have a think about what they might have collected. You know what the moon looks like, you know what's there, so they probably did not collect flowers, but what could they have collected? Have a think and then take a guess. Okay, let's see. They collected rock samples. So that's pretty logical, isn't it? They took rock samples back to Earth for the scientists to investigate, see what they were made of, and use that information in their scientific research. Okay, now it's time for you to watch the animation of the Apollo 11 spacecraft on its journey to the moon and back from the moon. So your teacher's just going to switch over to a different window, and then when you come back, we're going to have a little quiz, and we're going to see how you do with remembering the information that we've been talking about today. Okay, so here are your quiz questions. I hope you enjoyed the animation, by the way. It was so interesting, and I learnt a lot about how that spacecraft came apart and how they journeyed back to the Earth. So here's the first quiz question. How far is the moon from the Earth? All right, now it was a big number, wasn't it? So have a think. And do you know that it's thinking that helps us to remember? So we always want to give it a really good try when we're trying to remember something. So it was 6 numbers, and it was a big number. Here's the answer. 384,400 kilometres. What a long way they went. Here's the next one. How fast did their rocket travel during takeoff? Okay, this was a bit of an easier number to remember actually. So we're talking about kilometres per hour now because it's time. It was 10,000 kilometres per hour. Wow. How long did it take to arrive at the moon? This might be a little bit easier. Can you remember this one? It was 4 days. Now this one's a little tricky because probably you haven't heard this quote before. What did Neil Armstrong say as he stepped onto the moon? It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That's a great quote, isn't it? That's a great thing to have said. And lastly, what did the astronauts collect? Can you remember this one? Okay, it was rock samples. So how did you go? How did your memory go? Did you manage to remember some of those answers? Now this is important information about our history. So I would love it if you go home and you tell your mum or your dad or your brother or your sister or your friends, hey, did you know this information about the Apollo 11 and the astronauts who landed on the moon? And tell them about what you learnt today. That would be wonderful. Well, it's been lovely making this presentation for you, and I hope that I get to chat with you again. And teachers, if you're interested in training information about learning science strategies, I'd love you to get in touch with me. There's some processes on the website, masterylearninggroup.com.au, which will give you some ways to use spaced retrieval practice to help support durable learning. And there's also some free resources. So feel free to visit and get in touch with me anytime about some complementary teacher training. Thank you.